All right, so we're on habit number 8, and habit number 8 is simpler. Make it simpler. Why is simple good? One of the reasons that simple is, I think, attractive to us, it holds our attention, is because the world we live in is pretty not simple. It's pretty complicated. We live in a world that all of our electronic devices and even our cars, they're very, very complicated things in our life, and we're busy. So simple photos, clean, quiet, they tend to hold our attention and they become more interesting. So one of the ways that we do this in one of the most powerful composition way to take a photo techniques we have is using what's called framing, how we look at the world through our camera. So basically this is what we have when we look through a camera. We have a small slice, not the whole thing, and what we put in here in this box is the world. And so we need to pay attention to what goes in here. And the simpler we can make this, especially when you're starting photography, the more interesting your photos will be. So think about what goes in here. And everything that goes in here has to be important. And it's easier to balance all the elements in a photo and to make it interesting in this frame when there's less stuff there, when there's less things. So when you take a photo, find the subject you're taking a photo of. Look where it is in relation to the things around it, and then find the photo that you can take where you put the camera that isolates the subject, makes it simple and interesting. Look for distractions in the corner of the frames, especially. They tend to hide there. One other reason for making your photo simpler, for concentrating on one thing in your photo, is especially as you're learning this, and I still struggle with this a bit. When you're looking through either a small viewfinder or the screen on the back of your camera, it's hard because it's small to see all the details. So if you have something in the foreground and then in the middle where your subject might be, and then in the background, it's hard to balance all those elements in a complementary way so that the result, when you convert this 3D world to our 2D photo, looks interesting. So I recommend one way to get started and a practice to do is to make it simple. Find your subject, and then use the habit of getting closer. That'll help reduce the stuff around it. Get closer, find the one thing, and make that the star. Find a way to isolate it from its background and maybe the foreground as well. Although I tend to eliminate the foreground, and I do include backgrounds because that's easier, at least for me. So the idea here is to keep it simple, to really go with less is more. When a photo is crowded, it's complicated. It's sometimes hard to know what to look at, to know what I'm supposed to see in this little frame. So one way to make interesting photos is to keep it simpler, to minimize and reduce everything in the photo except the subject. So try that. Try getting closer. Just positioning the camera so there's maybe only one thing in the photo, the main subject. Everything else becomes secondary. So try that. Here's an example. I have this video framed, mostly it's just a little bit of the room so you can see a little bit of the context, but it's mostly me in the middle. If I go wider, so this framing is now wider, and there's more distractions. For example, I've got my chair over here, and you see the edge of the umbrella that's lighting my face here. You see all the clutter behind me. You see my knickknacks and coin jar and my wallet and stuff. You see my cable box. I mean, you see it in the other shot too, but when you're wide like this, it makes it harder to concentrate on the subject because there's so many other things going around. This is more complicated. The other shot, which I'll get back to, this other framing composition is simpler. You don't see as much of the stuff to the side. You don't even see my hands as much. You certainly don't see the light source over here, the umbrella, and the chair over here in this corner. So it's simpler. Think about that with your photos. And again, one of the easiest ways to do this is to get closer. Walk closer. If you have a wide angle lens on, which most phones do, if that's what you're using as your camera, just walk closer. Find the simplest version of the photo that you can. Take lots of photos, use that habit to find the one that is the simplest. The one that really only things in the photo are what needs to be there. There's nothing else. And those I really enjoy that's a style of photo I really like, a minimalist, simple photo. So try that, see what you think and how it works for you. I imagine no matter what you do, getting closer, minimizing distractions, making it simpler will result in more interesting photos. Okay, so we're going to illustrate this point of trying to make things simpler a little bit with this hydrangea bush that's just outside the front door to our condo. So it's got all these beautiful flowers on it. It's just lovely. But where's the interesting photo? You know, if I take a photo from here, it's a little complicated. There's lots and lots, and you don't know where to look. If I go over here, I've got some of the background with the moss and on the brick and such. So again, it's a little more complicated. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to move my feet and also zoom my lens. And what that's going to do is help me simplify by just focusing on one subject here. Actually, I'm mostly zooming. Nice thing about cameras with lenses. So this is a simpler composition. The background becomes out of focus. It's little easier to see the one thing and to enjoy that one interesting subject versus when you back up and see lots of things. They're all still very interesting, but it's a busier photo. It's more complicated, so it's harder to balance all the various elements, all these different sized flower heads to make an interesting composition, plus positioning them against the background in an interesting way so that, like for example, watch this. If I move from here, this one flower is kind of blending into the background. If I go over here just a little bit, now it's got a space for it to be against a simpler background. So you can see how zooming or moving with your feet, if you don't have a zoom, can make a simpler photo, a simpler image, therefore more interesting.